Oh, sorry, folks. I had a spinach salad for lunch. For those of you old enough to get that Popeye reference. Good afternoon, everyone. This is High Point Mayor Pro Tem Michael Holmes calling to order our special session, May 22nd, 2024. In chambers with me today are all members of council, with our Mayor Jefferson and Councilwoman McKeever. Virtual and absent is Councilman Johnson, who is on his way. Our first item up today on our agenda is the adoption of our agenda. So at this time, I will entertain a motion to adopt our agenda.
So moved. Second.
There's a motion by Councilwoman Peters, second by Councilwoman Cook. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion carries. Our first item up today, 2024-203, presentation of fiscal year 2024-25 budget by Ford High Point. And with us, we have Rebecca McGee, President and CEO.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mayor Pro Tem, Council, and staff. I'm excited to be here this afternoon to tell you about what Ford High Point / eventually Downtown High Point is doing and planning to do in the future. So I've got a little bit of a recap for you, a year in review. So when I was hired 2 years ago, we were looking at doing a strategic plan for the organization. There was a lot of feedback from the community about what our organization should be doing, needed to be doing. And so we went through the process of a strategic plan, which was completed. It feels like years and years ago at this point, but actually in October of 2023, out of that strategic plan, we have created and partnered in 2 new events, one of them being May Social Saturday, starting in May of 2023. Sorry, I'm getting my dates wrong. And then also the Carolina Core Brews Fest, which just finished last month. We've engaged a new development team for Showplace West, going to talk a little bit more about that later, working through the dynamics of that. And then also, I just wanted to highlight partnerships. We have built so many partnerships in the last 2 years. So when we did the strategic plan, it said we came out with 4 goals, and those goals you'll see in our projects that we are doing or have done. So the big one that came out, everyone said we wanted downtown marketing, business development and recruitment for those small businesses. We had a lot of people doing bits and pieces of what we were focused on, but we really needed to be focused on the core of downtown and those small businesses in that area. Placemaking, so that can be a generic term for any type of streetscape events, things that make people feel like High Point is home and where they want to be. And then a clean and safe initiative, which was more of a 5-year goal for that strategic plan. Projects and partnerships that we've done. So one of the partnerships that we've done is really start working on those businesses' relationships within the downtown. When I came here 2 years ago, one of the first things I asked for is I said, give me a list of all your downtown businesses and give me a map. And I was looked at and said, we have neither one of those. So we really worked on trying to build those partnerships, build those relationships. It is still an ongoing thing. We have started a monthly first Thursday meeting where everyone is welcome to attend, to hear what we are doing, to hear what other partnership organizations are doing, to give feedback. It really just becomes a vehicle for that advocate for those businesses. Like I said, Social Saturday and the Carolina Core Brews Fest, they kind of hit a lot of different goals within that strategic plan. We have the placemaking, like I mentioned, people feel home, they want to come here. We have the marketing and the business development. So the marketing, getting our name out there, getting the business's name out there, getting High Point's name out there. And then the business development. That day was an amazing day for not only our festival, but the businesses around it. And I have some numbers following that. Partnerships with the High Point Police Department, that is something that we are working on. In the downtown, we have a group text that kind of keep up and about with all of what's happening. If something's happening in an area, you can hop on that text and it'll go to the other business owners. It goes to myself as well, just to stay in the loop and stay connected. Showplace West, One Plaza Center, officially that building on April 10th. became what we believe to be the first 1970s building to be on the National Register in North Carolina. That allows this building to receive tax credits should developers want to utilize them. It's about an 18-month to 24-month process to be on that. And it wasn't a guarantee because, like I said, this is the first 1970s building. We are setting the way for historic preservation of the 1970s. They'll look to High Point at this building as the leader in what should be preserved and what is considered historic, and how much is, that building has also been gutted pretty much on the interior. So what pieces are left that actually make a building historic? Officially, its name is One Plaza Center, so that is why that is where business development. We have also had a contract with this building, and it did not move forward in the timeline that was needed, and we chose not to renew that contract. We are currently, or we put out an RFP in, I believe, September, October. A lot of stuff happened in the September, October in 2023, and we are currently working with a new developer, negotiating that to get that under contract at this point. And then Main Street Properties, a lot of people don't know that we have additional 4 properties up on Main Street between Ray and Westwood, sorry, that's a tongue twister, that we are also looking to do similarly with development such as Showplace West, maybe in a little bit different arm. These aren't a massive 150,000 square foot structure that is now considered historic, but we hope to do those as well. Possible future project that Forward High Point has talked about is we would love to be the advocate and the avenue for a small business grant. Whether that be on property structures, whether that be to help small businesses get started, we'd love to be that avenue to kind of help. We have wonderful incentives for large companies here, but it's really employee-based, 25 and up, which really doesn't fit those small businesses. You're not going to have 25 and up full-time employees when you have a small restaurant or a retail shop or a service-based business. So that's what we hope for in the future. This is a shot from one of our downtown business owners and partners meeting. I call them internally a BOP meeting. And it's anywhere from 20 to about 40 in attendance that we meet monthly, and we move them around. So I like to highlight the uptown area, the downtown area. We even go into the south end. This actually was at Chelsea on Green. So move them all around, and the business owners have been wonderful in partnering with us. Of course, everybody at this point knows Social Saturday. It's a partnership with Visit High Point. It is growing. We have anywhere from 14 to 17 locations with a trolley. The first Saturday of each month, we started with maybe 50 trolley riders in May of 2023. That's grown to over 200 trolley riders this past month, and businesses look forward to it each month. It's a great day. We have lots of activities for the summer coming up as well, talking about different events that can happen in conjunction with this. Thank you to the City Council for the decision the other night on the Uptown Social District. You have no idea how excited those business owners are and how much we believe that this will impact Social Saturday for the better. So keep an eye out, and June 1st, that will be coming up. And then, of course, the Carolina Core Brews Fest was another partnership with Visit High Point. We had 1.6 thousand attendees in the stadium. That does not include what was in and around downtown. That was just within that festival between vendors and breweries and participants. And 35 breweries. We've heard amazing things from both the participants as well as the breweries. Every brewery that was here wants to come back. They said it was one of the most well-run brew festivals that they've ever been to, especially since it was a first-year initiative. A lot of them say it takes 5 to 7 years to work out the kinks that we had out the first year. So I was really proud of that. And it was a wonderful day, wonderful weather. I joked that when we picked this date, I have the worst luck for the 4th weekend in April because it's rained for the last 10 years, FYI. It did not, so I was so excited. And then, of course, Showplace West, I touched on that earlier. You'll see the certificate for One Plaza Center. I am extremely proud of that because I am a preservationist at heart. I love historic buildings. I love historic redevelopment because once that architecture is gone, you cannot get it back. I don't care if you build it to look like it, it is not the same as that feel. And so there's a lot of history here for the community, and we want to see that redeveloped. Like I said, I hope to have some announcements in the next month or two. Don't know if it's going to be that fast. I say a month or two, and then development is much longer than that. But super proud of this, super proud for High Point, and hope to see more in the future of that. So the 2024-2025 proposed budget for us is actually staying the same as the previous year. We received $250,000 from the city previous year. A county appropriation is $40,000. We did add in there the Brews Fest amount for ticket sales and our partnership. And you'll see roughly the same, staying the same minus the staff expenses. We actually had a part-time employee that has not had a position filled for the last 9 to 10 months. I'm about to go crazy by myself. And so we noticed with our strategic plan that was needed to be a full-time position and have more of the activities going on. There's some things I've not been able to do because of focusing on just the day in and day out activities. I'm very excited to say I made a job offer today. So hopefully in the next month I will be able to breathe a little bit more, but roughly everything stays about the same as the year previous. And that is the end of my presentation. Are any questions from council?
Rebecca, thank you so much. At this time, we'll open it up to council for questions. And also, Councilwoman McKeever and Mayor Jefferson, if you are available, wanting to ask questions, you're recognized at this point. Councilman Andrew.
Yeah, Councilman Andrew, question. The 2024-25 revenues, your city appropriation line, total budget $250,000, different year-to-date budget $50,000, total budget $250,000.
I apologize, that is a typo in there, in the middle of that, because it is a typo in the 50,000. It is the same each year. I apologize.
Okay, so
That is a typo.
That question. The second question, the trolley that's running around, who owns that and who pays for maintenance operation of that trolley?
That has been a different trolley as we figured out these in May of 2023. We hired, through May of 2023 and December of 2023, we hired about 3 different trolley companies. This is a partnership with Visit High Point. The actual payment of the trolley is from Visit High Point's budget, not our budget. At this time, since February of 2024, we have actually partnered with Bill from Sweet Old Bill's and his trolley. And actually he's been an amazing partner. It's been about half the cost of what other trolleys cost because he just wants to benefit High Point. And so right now that is going through with Bill at Sweet Old Bill's.
Okay,
But you will not see that reflected in this budget.
Wonderful. And last question, your potential small business grants, do you anticipate partnering with the city on that? What's the vision for this small business?
It would be a partnership with the city. I have done different grants in different cities before. A lot of them tend to be based on historic preservation for downtowns. High Point does not have a whole lot of historic stock left. So I'd like to get together with my board, our committees, and partnership with the city and think of ways that we can tackle a small business grant in a different way. Just because if we limited it to historic structures, you essentially have some of the buildings on Church Street that are left and maybe some on Commerce Street, and that's it because there's not a whole lot of historic untouched stock in High Point.
Is this a initiative you expect to bring for the next budget coming up, or how soon do you think?
If there were any additional budget funds in the current year, I would love to have them this year. If there is not, I would like the fund to put together I would like to work on the process this year with the budget of next year,
Very
if
good.
that is directed.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, yes.
This is Tasha Logan Ford, City Manager, for those that might be listening online. There was some discussion at our Fort High Point Board meeting around having an interest to be able to have the granting program. And there was a request at that point for there to include some additional funds in the budget for that. realizing just where we were as a city. I did request that they try to hold the line with their existing budget for this year, and that if council was able to identify some additional funds, that we would have that conversation with Forward High Point. So I wanted to acknowledge that because it was shared by the board of Forward High Point, that they would like to see those funds in the budget. But as staff was working through the city's budget, we just felt like it was appropriate to hold the line at this point.
Thank you.
Excellent.
I'd like to recognize Councilman Johnson, who has joined us. Rebecca, could you expand on the branding strategy for Forward High Point for the next few years?
So part of our strategic plan identified the fact that Forward High Point is not a very well-known organization outside of city council, outside of the immediate partners that work with it. When we asked the community, hey, what is Forward High Point to you? A lot of people had absolutely no idea. That was a strategic decision when Forward High Point was created to help work through the stadium. But at this point, we have transitioned into more of a full-time downtown role at which the merchants really need to know who it is, what it is, and it needs to be a brand identifiable by the community. So it was a recommendation in our strategic plan to change our name from Forward High Point to Downtown High Point. We put together a marketing committee in November, December, I believe, after our strategic plan was adopted. And we've started the process of looking into that. We really didn't have the budget funds allocated for that in our previous budget, so that is something that is planned for in this budget. Through like our social media, through the marketing, that's where those funds will come from. And yeah, if this budget is approved, I hope to have that in the next couple months, that rename.
Yeah, I'm interested in the reception that got from business owners who fall in that district, and what was the feedback like from them on the change from Forward High Point to Downtown High Point? Like, and what input did they have?
So we had several community sessions, we had surveys, we had our regular monthly meeting that I call the BOP meeting, and it was actually extremely supportive. I cannot name a singular business owner that wanted us to remain Forward High Point. They all wanted us to convert to Downtown High Point because we are taking on the role of a traditional downtown organization. So you think downtown Greensboro, you think the Downtown Winston-Salem Partnership, downtown Salisbury, they're all identifiable organizations, and you know immediately, if you're in that realm of a business owner, you know kind of what's expected of that organization. So it was pretty much a unanimous decision amongst the business owners that they would like to see that change. It also allows us, when we are marketing our events, I have already kind of done some of that transition just to help, because like our Facebook, our social media was all Forward High Point. The general community did not know to go to Forward High Point to look for Social Saturday. And so some of that has already dipped my toe in the water, even without the formal process, because of changes that were needed immediately when we took on Social Saturday and when we did the Brews Fest. So it's a very much wanted transition. It's just been slower coming than I'd hoped for.
In terms of the overall connection to we have multiple organizations that are branding right now, and everyone seems to be taking on that initiative. How will Forward, now Downtown, fit into that landscape of the city rebrand, Catalyst District, all the different things, social districts, all the different things that are happening right now? How will that branding connect to one another?
I think we're actually in a really good position for it now, while because we have waited and because we haven't been able to do it as quickly as I'd like, other projects have been completed. And I've talked to our marketing committee and just sometimes the general board of what I would like to see is a connection of the city brand to our brand. I particularly love the city brand for the dot on the foot of the H. And I joke because our brand, did I do something?
Nope.
Our brand is, right now, as Forward High Point, is the arrow made up of dots.
Sure.
So I'd love to incorporate those dots somehow in the future because it speaks to what we were, it speaks to where the city has dots in theirs. But I think it's a good time because we can actually look and see what's already been done and where we don't have to, so where we can coordinate, because essentially we are an offshoot of the city. We are not a city employee, but my budget comes from the city.
Sure.
So I want to coordinate with that and connect with that so everybody sees that connection of us to the city and knows that we are an organization supported by the city.
Yeah, I think there would be some welcome synergy there. I think, just just the nature of downtown High Point and what you all do and the strategic alignment with our city goals. I think that synergy, kind of co-branding the organizations, I think would lend itself to making the organization a lot more recognizable.
I agree very much.
Does anyone have any additional questions for Rebecca, Mayor Jefferson, or Councilwoman Keeler? Any questions for you all who are virtual?
No, sir, I don't have any questions at this time. Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
All right. Well, Rebecca, thank you for your presentation. We really appreciate it. Our next item, 2024-204, presentation of fiscal year 2024-25 budget from Visit High Point. And here today, gracing us with her presence, is Melody Burnett, President of Visit.
I'm so honored to grace you with my presence today, especially during National Travel and Tourism Week. How appropriate for me to deliver the State of the Union address to you guys with my budget. In all seriousness, I'm so happy to tell you what we have in store for next fiscal year. We have really experienced some tremendous growth, and before we look into the future, let's look at where we have been just in the last few years. And of course, you can see all the dips and dives where we've had some unexpected economic downturns with the September 11th attacks, the recession in 2008, and of course the pandemic. I like to joke with my board that this is when I came on board right here in 1920, and then my board's like, wait, you just drove it down. We just put you here at the head. But of course that was 6 months later we had the pandemic, but boy did we recover, and we recovered really, really strongly. At 120% in 2021, 22, 23, we had 25%, but that is starting to slow down as we anticipate a growth of about 1% at the end of our fiscal year, and we've got one more June projection, which will reflect in April month during that time. So what we like to do is around our mid-budget cycle between January and March is readjust if we need to. So we look at that occupancy tax that's coming in to see if we are actually reaching those projections. And the projections were coming in fairly strong that we readjusted an extra 3% of anticipated growth within our occupancy tax. We also adjusted in some other areas. Our admin budget, we decreased by 5%, operations by 5%. We weren't in our new building yet, so that's where those adjustments came in. Increased direct group bookings, our tourism promotion. And in our events development, we had anticipated a pretty robust budget of about $273,460, but we had some partners that weren't quite ready to commit to implement. So we went ahead and scaled that down about 48%, which makes our budget for this year for events development at about $196. And then diving into this fiscal year budget, just calling attention to those revenue streams. Everything should be familiar to you in terms of the majority of our budget does come from those occupancy taxes that are collected within our accommodations from visitors. And we expect about a 1% increase there, which is very conservative. Because it's an election year, because there's a lot of uncertainty, we think that folks will really buckle down within the next fiscal year, so we're going to plan for that. Our interest income, we have that slashed in half just because we've dipped into our reserves to plan for the upfit of our new building in our downtown area. We're going to realize some rental income with some subtenants that we have invited to share that space with us in downtown. But the line items that are highlighted in yellow are new line items that may not be familiar to you. Of course, we'd like to thank you for the ARPA funds that you guys announced. I think it was maybe a little over a month ago. And we anticipate perhaps receiving those within this fiscal year of about $200,000, and that will be for a temporary interactive art installation for about 3 months. And then, of course, we have some equipment furnishings rental within our events equipment that we anticipate renting out to the community. But the $160,000 events revenue is a new line item. We anticipate some partnerships with 6 different events that we have planned out for next fiscal year, and that could be through event ownership, it could be through ticket sales, it could be through alcohol sales, or even sales of swag items. So that's a very aggressive number. I'm a little nervous about that number, but if we grow our staff, which we have anticipated doing by 1, we would be a little bit more assertive and aggressive in reaching that new revenue stream. Right now, we are 7 full-time positions. Our events development staff or department is a staff of 1. If you know anything about events, that's night, weekends, and holidays, so we definitely need some support there, which will make us 8 full-time staff and of course 2 interns and 2 part-timers. Just calling attention to our operation expenses, that's about 18% of our budget. It's increased by 18%. A lot of that comes with our move to the downtown area. And of course, we have some travel expenses that are tied in with some certifications with our professional development. For our direct booking expenses, a lot of this has to do with niche sports marketing that we do. A lot of that also goes to our support of the High Point Market Authority. Logo items, those are all line items that should be familiar to you, but some of the line items that we have realized that are new would be a resident sentiment survey. We think that it's a great time to really introduce that survey in a really collective way, and we would invite the City of High Point, Forward High Point, and other stakeholders to help us curate those questions and do that in a really strategic way, just to try to gauge the litmus test of our residents to see if they are happy with the events that are being implemented, some of the marketing that's out there, and the overall sentiment of our community, especially now that it's in rapid transformation, and maybe get in the habit of doing that maybe every 5 years. Also, a media assessment in partnership with Visit North Carolina, and this is the media's perception of our community, and that would be in partnership with Visit NC as a co-op. And Autism Travel Video and Influencer Campaign, you know that we are now a certified autism destination. We want to be very intentional about that autism travel and what that marketing looks like around that.
Can you speak to what, this is Councilman Moore, I don't mean to interrupt, but
No,
while you're
no.
on the subject, that's a fairly new addition and honor that the autism recognition. What has that spawned since it's happened first?
Sure. Well, we have grown our certified autism centers by 18. So we have 18 partners. A lot of those partners are restaurant, hotels, event venues, or attractions. And so that's really our low-hanging fruit. We've hosted some autism travel writers. We did that last summer. We took them to a Rockers game. We took them to those certified autism centers. We've been hanging out with a lot of travel writers because they're very interested in that story because it's very unique. And of course, we came out first, being the first on the East Coast and the second in the nation. And I'll tell you that I think you're going to see more step in line to get those certifications as a destination. So we have to run and run hard in order to really get our fair share of that marketing, especially as we're talking about inclusive travel. We're talking about travelers who are aging that have special needs too. So that space could be very vast. And then we've got a lot of great articles that have come out of our certified autism centers as well. That in order to curate more opportunities, we just have to connect more with our partners, and we do so quarterly with them. So we're just scratching the surface. Thank you for that question.
So, Mayor Pro Tem Holmes, the market on that type of tourism and travel, what do you think that looks like projected in the future?
Of course, but what we've learned from our training is that autism is growing at a rate at 600% every year. So just those numbers alone, and 1 out of 4 children between the ages of 4 and 8 will be diagnosed, and that's just children. So then when you think about their families and where their limitations are and where they can go, we expect tremendous growth. I haven't necessarily quantified or had some stretch goals of how many visitors are coming that are on the spectrum, but we do have our ear to the ground with our partners. There's a really great article that came out with Distractions Art that is on Highway 68. They have quantified that they have gotten visitors from Charlotte, Martinsville area that have intentionally come just for that experience for them and then have gone to other partners. So, I don't know if they necessarily have stayed overnight. I think we're getting a lot of day trippers for that. But once we sharpen our pencil a little bit and finesse some of those experiences, I think there's a lot of opportunity there.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions on that initiative or any other?
Yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead, Tim.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, question. The ARPA funds were used, you mentioned a temporary interactive art I didn't catch anything after that. Can you explain what that is, please?
Sure, we submitted the application, I believe, in January of last year. And the spirit of that exhibit would mirror very closely to the Van Gogh experience that was in Charlotte, I think it was almost 2 years ago.
Okay.
Charlotte realized about 300,000 visitors for that exhibit that ran for about 3 months. And if you engaged in that exhibit at all, it was in a warehouse type facility. We have lots of those here in High Point. It wasn't necessarily in the best section of town, but they were able to curate it quite nicely. And with our research, there are tons of exhibits just like that out there that could be as small for a 25,000 square feet facility or as big as a 75,000 square feet facility. So we wrote that grant to the city of High Point in hopes that we could at least pay for the exhibit and then figure out the rest later with some partnerships and leverage some of our budget too. So that $200,000 investment will at least pay for an exhibit for 3 months. The closer we can get to the urban core of that downtown area to have a walkable experience to restaurants and other attractions, the better off we'll be in order to realize that 300,000 visitor count.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I'm happy to talk to you outside too if you want some more detail around that.
I think the investment of that, the return on that investment is the spillover effect of what happens around
Of course.
that when you curate that. One final question about the autism destination. From our community partners, what do they need to do to be ready to receive that market? Like how do we scale ourselves to be able to receive folks who are in that market?
Of course, but a lot of that comes from the leadership out of our office, which is through the training. So we have intentionally made sure that we have line items cured out to make it attainable for them to get that training. The training can be fairly expensive, and if you have turnover, like if you're at a hotel or a restaurant, that's just the reality of the hospitality industry. So making sure that they, number one, can commit to that initial training. Anytime that they want to renew that training, it's a less investment than the initial. But we always want to make sure that they're able to get there. And so we've done that the last 2 years. The training is key.
Sure.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions? All right. Now I can't get my mouse to work. Continuing with tourism promotion, of course, some of these line items should look familiar to you. I'm hoping everyone is familiar with the events calendar, and we call it High Point Events Calendar. It's not necessarily Visit High Points, but we do pay to have the events calendar. And last year paid for several of our partners to have that widget on their homepage because we don't want visitors just to find it on Visit High Point site. We want to find it on the city site, on the chamber site, High Point Discover site. And be able to utilize it to the max, and that's worked out extremely well. Some of the biggest expense in some of these line items will be a refresh of our Visit High Point website as well as the Live in High Point website as well. The Visit High Point website has over 2,000 pages, and now's a really good time for us to do that refresh, which is about every 3 to 5 years we'd like to do that. We're also talking with a lot of partners in the community that may be a single nonprofit with one executive director, and they're just mired down by the technicalities of their website, and they just don't know how to route in those call to actions. If it makes sense for us to partner with them, we'll have that dialogue to even create some landing pages for them if that helps soften their burden a little bit. Continuing with advertising, hopefully if you guys are watching PBS, you'll see some of our advertising around the Side by Side series with Dr. Quabain, maybe even some of the Rudel campaigns that they have with kids programming or NC Weekend. Our state magazine has been really kind to us in the last year. We continue to have conversations with them. Right now, I know Ryan's involved with us in a group chat regarding our state tourism video that we're discussing right now. They're going to start doing some filming as of June 1st here. Lots of opportunity with Business North Carolina. But when you look at the relocation guide, the newcomers guide, the travel guide, we actually get curated leads from that. When we get those leads, we're able to do mailings based off of those inquiries of folks who genuinely have responded to those ads. And then, of course, our printed collateral, our destination guide. If you're not familiar with that in town, that's the one that's got the dinosaur on the front. We reprint that every year, not as many as we used to, because people still like print, even though we have all of our marketing in any way you like, website or print, any way you like it, we've got it. We do restaurant tent cards, you'll see that spread throughout town, our events calendar promos as well. Our home furnishings and design guide is a signature guide that's very unique to High Point, that helps those consumers navigate the 100+ retail stores within our greater High Point area. Of course, we have our autism travel guide, and we're actually getting curated leads from that. So we've been placing some of those autism travel advertising through certain magazines, and in fact, I think we just had 30 of those come through today. So we have our part-timer staffs that respond to that. Our VIP tour, we used to do that once a year, but High Point is changing and rearranging so quickly. We do that 4 times a year. I think that our staff does that really well, and we have a lot of demand centered around that complimentary tour of High Point. It is specifically for our hospitality industry, but we also invite any of those other feeder markets to also get on the bus and come tour with us. And of course, we've got great partners like Tammy Staff that gives us a peek into market and Market District and other areas as well. And then of course, our events development expenses, we are increasing that by 98%. We're expecting to utilize about $185,000 in our current budget. We'd like to grow that $366,470. That work in our office is easy to see, measure, budget, and I think we see the results of that very easily. With growing 1 more staff and of course doubling that budget, we expect to see even more. At the bottom where you see the asterisks, this is some new things that we're working on right now is a dog agility event that could easily be implemented at Truist Point Stadium, an international food festival, a future concert series with iHeartRadio, which would be 3 of those. Out of the $366,470, 50% of that budget would be curated for the greater downtown urban core district of our community, really feeding in to those attractors like Truist Point, our food hall, Condon Yards, and others. And of course, when you look at the grand scheme of our budget, this is how it's allocated. 28% is to admin, 18% to operations, 14% to group booking, 18% to tours and promotion, 13% to events development. And of course, we have 6% for our reserve. Our reserve is down to almost 4 months of operating expenses, and so we'd like to build that back up between now and fiscal year 28-29. Is there any other questions that you all may have?
Councilman, I have another question. The 3% grant is to whom?
In our legislation, it says that 15% of our budget needs to be allocated for specific arts and tourism related projects. $250,000 of that is allocated to Truist Point Stadium, and that's a long-term agreement that we have with the city. And so any overages of that $250,000, we earmark that for specific tourism-related types of events or expenditures. And that would be close around $90,000 for that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Do we have any other questions for Melody at this time?
Melody, you mentioned having a lot of income from events. Is that, what events is that? The dog agility and that kind of stuff? Or is that-
There's 6 that we have earmarked. One would be Carolina Corn Brew Fest. Now that we've gotten one under our belt, we know what we're dealing with. One would be a ticketed experience for our winter experience. So an introduction to our winter experience was the domes this year, but now we're looking at maybe adding some slides or an ice skating rink where that could be ticketed and maybe a revenue share. The International Food Festival would be another one. We also earmarked a boxing event. That could be a potential revenue share, as well as the R&B Soul Picnic if it comes back for next year, which we hope it will.
Any other questions from our members who are virtual? not,
Mayor Pro Tem, I don't have any questions, but a brief comment. I appreciate the work being done. And a lot of what's happening regarding events, I'll say this, and Mayor, I think I've said this directly to you, your team. I do think that that is a real multiplier for the work we're doing. Given that we're still a ways off from having a fully sustained sort of downtown where the foot traffic and the activity is organic. We're at that stage within our revitalization so many years in, where we do still have work that manufactures that foot traffic, that generates the activity, which means you have to be intentional. And I do think a lot of the events that Visit High Point's done along with Forward High Point, that work's been very, very collaborative, but also very, very effective. So I want to shout that out and just thank you all for the work you're doing.
thank you, Ms. Mary. I'll echo that and also say that I'm really happy to see the diversity of events, everything from boxing to outdoor. You're starting to see more things that attract different communities, and that's what we're looking for. You know, when we think about our brand and we think about the inclusivity of what we're trying to foster here in the city, that comes with what we offer to our citizens, and starting to see different types of events, different at different venues, different types of events, and that's what brings people who are normally not participating in our downtown economy. That's what brings them out, and so I'm really happy to see that diversity. I think that's a key to achieving what we want to do in that foot traffic that Mayor Jefferson is talking about.
I could not agree with you more. I hear more and more comments of saying, I went to this event and I didn't see hardly anybody I knew. That means that we're doing the right things, is hitting all the KPIs in our tourism checklist.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, Mel, thank you so much for the presentation. If there are no further questions, our next item.
I wanted to know one thing. You talked a lot about the events that Visit High Point is engaged in. There's also one piece that's important, as they're starting to do kind of the refresh of their website, which I know is welcome for Mel and the team there. That's also something that the city will be working on the next year as we launch our new brand. We delayed that a little bit.
Sure.
So I think that now that the time is, the city is starting to look at what our website's going to look like. The same time Visit High Point is starting to look at that. You know, there's been a lot of conversation around our tech committee about being able to publicize events, and we want to make sure we still have that available on our website. So just the synergy that we have with our partnership, I think is starting to be seen in a more holistic way, that we're all working together. So I just wanted to highlight that piece, that we'll all be starting that same process around the same time.
Certainly,
Yeah.
the tech committee was born out of a desire from our citizens to be more included in the know on what's happening.
Yeah.
You know, the one thing that you always hear is you get comments on your Facebook feed, and it's like, why did I know that was going on?
Exactly.
And I think that's what the synergy that we have between our partners and our tech committee and our city. I think that will bring a lot of folks like out of the woodwork.
I would like to add on to that. There's one complaint that I had concerning the city's website on the advertising of this event. The budget event wasn't very easy on the homepage to find, so I'm glad that we're thinking about redoing the city's website, because something like this probably should have been more prominent on the page.
Good. Thank you, Councilman Andrew. Next up, we'll have item 2024-205, presentation of fiscal year 2024-2025 budget market authority. And with us, we have Tammy Nagin, President, CEO, and Terry Venable, VP of Operations and Finance. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Mayor Pro Tem Holmes. Glad to be with you all today and talk a little bit about our upcoming budget and sort of our priorities going forward for market. Just coming off a positive April show, it's always good to stand in front of you and present some positive numbers. Just to review a little bit kind of where we've been, you all will remember that a year ago I stood here very new into the president's role and talking to you about our goals and sort of how our team would move forward. We have adopted to continue with our 4 focus areas, and just to talk a little bit about those today. That number 1 is the most important to our team. Cultivating new buyer targets to come to market is keeping our event relevant and making sure that the world knows that High Point is the center of the home furnishings universe, and if someone is purchasing home furnishings product at wholesale to resale, we want them to come here to do so. And so our team is really working hard to make sure that we're looking at these targets. for example, just to give you some insight into this, for the past 2 markets, we've really targeted antique dealers. This is a huge industry right now. If you've had your home redone in the recent, or you've been into a home furnishings store, you will no doubt see antiques. That's a big part of what's going on, and High Point has a huge antique selection. So making sure that folks who are in this space understand that we are a place they need to come. We are moving for the October market to mid-tier retailers. So not those top 100s, not your Rooms to Go, not your Halleck Myers, but that next tier down. These are your locally owned, usually a family business. Usually they own 2 to 7 stores, fall within a certain sales volume on our spectrum, and we are finding, a matter of fact, we've really dug into our data, and we have lost 40% of those folks to either going out of business or not coming to High Point. They're just purchasing from rep. So we're actually working closely with the city on some items as well to really help get these folks back. But that's really our goal in that number 1 bullet, is to always be looking at who we're missing and who's that next group like antiques that are going to be important. We know that we've all redone our outdoor space, so the casual industry is big. Those kinds of targets are something we will continue to look in. The next bullet is the most important, I would say the second most important, because if you recruit them all day, if you don't take care of them, they don't come back. So a frictionless guest experience, everything from the moment they visit that website to learn more about High Point to the point that they return home. Making sure that all of those touch points are taken care of, and we are striving to be much like a Disney for home furnishings, that they're taken care of while they're here. The third, that long-range technology improvements, we've all been talking about that from a budget standpoint, as well as hearing Tasha talk about from the city. We are also always looking at that website, always looking at the app, all those the ways that people get information, and really concentrating there. The third piece of that for us that's very important is the data piece. Because that is how we're making decisions these days, is really looking at who's coming, who's not coming, how often they're coming, how they're getting here, what they're doing when they're here. We've been doing lots of heat mapping on our website and really learning how people get information about High Point, and concentrating on that end customer is important there. So you'll see a lot of the budget dedicated to that as well. And the last but certainly not least is nourishing the next generation of home furnishings professionals. And this means 2 things. This means students, is really talking to our young people about this sector, because we are a trade show that represents an industry. If that industry is not healthy and is not attracting new people into the industry, we don't need a trade show. So we need to make sure that we're doing our part to make sure our students understand what is in this industry for them. And the way they can do that is to have some entree into High Point twice a year. So we've been working closely with High Point Schools Partnership here locally, as well as the Bean and Stock, who does great work across the U.S. and with it, which is women in the home industry today, to do lots of mentoring, scholarships, and working closely with student base, not only here in High Point, but across the U.S. to make sure they understand the value that is in High Point in terms of home furnishings design. It also means people new to the industry. We've been working hard on with DAA, which is our Diversity Advocacy Alliance, and getting new people involved in this industry that maybe haven't necessarily felt welcome in home furnishings in the past. And this group has really embraced this concept, and the streets of High Point during market look different than they did 5 years ago, certainly. And just making sure that we are doing what we need to do to embrace all people coming, especially those who are new into design and are new into the industry, to make sure they recognize that High Point is the place where they can find the resources that they need.
Tammy,
Yes.
if you could go back to that slide,
Yeah.
to that final bullet point.
Yes.
I get a lot of questions from the public on how, I live in High Point, I've lived in High Point for 20 years, I've never been to the market.
Right.
How can we, what is the plan to access and make accessible the market for folks who've lived here their whole lives but have never experienced that,
Right.
or who may have a child or a loved one who may fall into that student range
Right.
and needs to get exposed, maybe for a future career in home furnishings.
It is tough, Michael, I would say, because, we want to expose people to what's going on here, but at the same time, recognizing that this is a credential trade show, so making sure that we're attracting the folks that these buyers who are leasing space here want to see. It is a win-win. It's interesting because I feel like in the past year, we've done a lot more outreach. I've done 2 community tours that have been very specific to getting folks who've lived in High Point their whole life here that have never seen the insides of these buildings. We do tours for new city employees. We do tours we did the chamber this market, High Point First. So reaching out to groups and getting them in to really have that kind of behind the scenes look at what we do here. It's hard because we can't open that up to everyone, but I will tell you if there are folks who are specifically interested, we can find a way for them to get a look into what we do. The second piece of that is, as you mentioned, the student piece. We've I would say we came out of the gate a year ago sort of touching a lot of different areas, and what we're finding is the best way to do that is to have some, I would say, sort of portals into that work. I mentioned High Point Schools Partnership. That is where we have really concentrated our work in the past year, is getting some access to some students. For example, Ben Napier from Hometown, if anybody watches HGTV, was here at the October market, and we asked him if he would do a workshop for local students. Central High School had just started the woodworking program, and so we reached out through High Point Schools Partnership and worked with the woodworking class to bring students here. And Ben we brought a lathe from Galax. Don't ask, it was I've learned much more about the world of woodworking, Mayor Pro Tem, than I ever wanted to know. But getting that equipment down here to the Showplace parking lot, and he did demonstrations for them he made a cutting board. And so they watched from beginning to end how this happened. What was so interesting is, these students are standing in front of a celebrity. Most of them had no idea. They're all on their phones, like Googling, like, who is this guy? And then they're like, oh, and you see them start to pay attention. Where they really started paying attention is he made this beautiful cutting board, and he said to all of them, is this something, you all would like to do? And they all kind of shrugged their shoulders. And he looks over at his wife, Erin, who manages their store in Mississippi, and says, Erin, how much do we sell this cutting board for? And she said, $120. And they all went, and you saw them all light up, and I was like, yes, now it makes sense. They start to put 2 and 2 together. We want to get to that level of engagement for students. What can we bring because of access to these folks who come to our city twice a year that maybe aren't coming to High Point every day? How do we get them in front of those students? So those kinds of things we want to do more of.
Has there been any consideration of a registered apprenticeship, or potentially to capture those students who may be interested in the CTE courses and vocational courses
Yes.
in high school?
That is probably better suited, and we've had some conversation with our Manufacturers Association, more so than with us. They have much more of the conduit to talk to those folks and to really realize the right place for them to be. So we have had some conversations with AHFA to kind of continue the work. It's one thing to kind of turn them on to it while they're here and in the middle of this show, and they're seeing the design and they're seeing what's happening here, but then what's next? If a student gets interested, how do we capture that, and how do we make sure that they're able to carry that through? We've worked closely also with the Interwoven, the fabric show, who is a great student program as well. So making sure we're all kind of pulling in the right direction and working on those things together.
And I ask those questions, and thank you for those very
Yeah.
detailed answers. I ask those questions because as we endeavor to figure out how to keep young professionals here in the city.
Yeah.
Every opportunity we have to spawn new creatives here, that drives us towards that goal. And so you guys are an incredibly important part of that
Right.
as our kind of our legacy industry here.
Yes.
If you guys are innovating and connecting to a new generation, that'll actually support our goals of keeping young professionals here.
You know, and one thing, we have for years reached out to colleges all over the US because they do if they are in a design program, they qualify for a student pass.
Yeah.
And many of those professors will bring groups here and engage with exhibitors, set up appointments and really get those students engaged. What we haven't done is brought that to our local students. And that's something that, you know, we have really done a lot of work on in the past year, and I would say kind of throwing it all against the wall. Things like we did mentoring this past time where we matched local students with industry professionals for the day. We've done several things, but I think it's really now that figuring out what works best and how we do more of it. How do you multiply that and not just do these small pilot programs? So, yeah, absolutely. So moving on to our budget, you all have the budget document that sort of builds out all of this, but hitting the highlights. When I stood before you in last year at this time, we were in a little over $8.7 million budget in revenue. We learned from the legislature on October 3rd that we became a $13 million organization because we were recipients of 3 new buckets of money, so to speak. One is an increase in our marketing funds, $450,000, and that was added to our recurring that will be used for marketing going forward. We also, through working with Cecil Brockman and our mayor, had $250,000 of DEI funds granted to us, where we've worked specifically with that Diversity Advocacy Alliance, and now working with some of our local community groups with that as well. And then all of you all know the infrastructure dollars, the $9 million that will be spent on infrastructure in the showroom district, everything from burying power lines to work in our transportation terminal, streetscaping, those kinds of things. Even Jerry Market had a team, I don't know if many of you saw them, a cleanup crew. We had teams of people on the streets kind of helping keep things clean so that city crews didn't have quite as much to do as they picked up during the show, or somebody really to go in and talk to showrooms or help us find those showrooms that needed maybe a little higher touch from public service. So up to $13.4 million. In this coming budget that you all are reviewing, the 24-25, those DEI funds were a one-year revenue. And so this new budget includes $5 million from the infrastructure, was $4 million last year, $5 million this year for the total of $9 million, and it does include that recurring NCDOC increase for a little over $14 million in revenue. And you'll see those broken out into the sheet that you all have. I always like to look at this just in terms of where those dollars are coming from. 20% of those being local dollars, so that's your contribution to the market. That is Guilford County. That is, okay, my head just went right out of that. Guilford County, City of High Point, and occupancy tax, which Melody talked about. Our state dollars up to 49%, that's in 2 buckets, DOC, Commerce, and Department of Transportation. And then the industry at 31%, we do have some charging that we do for folks who are coming to market with certain pass types. That's our showroom tax, which is collected by the city and distributed to us, and also some sponsorship is at 31%. So a nice public-private partnership. These figures do not include those infrastructure dollars because they are not recurring. So just looking at that overall. If you look at how our expenses land, again, as I stood here last year, we were about $8.7 million. As Melody talked about doing her sort of work at the middle of her budget. We handle that at forecast, and so we forecast up once we get those state dollars. We, of course, going into the second year of the biennium, now we know what we will have, so we will not have to forecast up as much this time as we did in that first year of the biennium, but about 11.4 in expenses is where we will end this year, and our budget for next year will be a little over 14 to match that income. To look at these across our areas, administration, so what it takes to run our business, you'll see 827 down a little bit this year to 815, recognizing some savings there. One thing we've been able to do is redistribute some of our salary lines across at a better matching the scope of work to more where our employees are where their work is landing, so some of that was recognized in administration. Transportation up a little bit, that is just inflation basically with 70 plus pieces of equipment that Terry rents for transportation. Those costs have gone up. Registration, we're basically flat. We are changing our registration company this market, so we are hopeful that those costs will stay comparable. We've been with the previous provider since 2009. Yeah, we're lots of deep breathing. Lots of people think those passes just kind of happen.
Yeah.
That is probably the hardest part of our business, is managing that database, and actually that pass production is not easy. And so changing companies is painful. The last time I did it, I will never forget coming in from a day at market and seeing I had voicemail. Again, 2009, we all depended on that rather than calling your cell, and I hit the button and it said, you had 72 voicemails in your, it's like, uh-oh, I think we have a problem. Marketing remains something that is incredibly important to us. You see in the roll-up budget that we gave you all, that those ARPA dollars, the COVID as they are shown there, those have sunsetted. We do not have those in 24-25, and that's really where those dollars were concentrated, was marketing, of course, to help us recover from COVID. So that's a little bit down. And guest services is, that's probably where we see the majority of the increase. When we were the recipient of those additional dollars in the last fiscal year, we decided to go back to one night of national talent for our concerts. We hear from our customer that is an important thing to keeping them in our city. If we let them go right as the trade show ends, they all go back to where they're staying. If we can do entertainment here and keep them in our city, they're a lot more willing to go to dinner and go to bars, go to those things, if they've spent a couple of hours in our concert lot having a good time. And so we have done that for the past 2 markets, and we do anticipate that going forward. I do not see us doing more than one night of entertainment, but that has been something that we found successful. This past market, we had a little over 3,500 people in that Showplace parking lot for the Goo Goo Dolls. So really good for us. Expense highlights, no increase in staff. We do have 12 full-time staff members and 4 part-time or contract members of our staff who those do work year-round but are part-time and are just at 12 full-time equivalents. But this is a little bit of what I talked about, realigning those expenses where their scope of work lands. Changes in that registration contractor resulting in some different cost centers and moving some of those things around. This new company is able to do some things for us that the old company was not able to do. So hopefully we will realize some savings in some places, but open up some dollars maybe for some more marketing as we go through, and then continuing with that one night of national act. One thing I just want to mention, and I put as a bullet point at the end of this, is because of how those state dollars for DEI and for the infrastructure are landing, our budget doesn't look as clean as it always has. We're not seeing that really strict, like one fiscal year to the next fiscal year, income matches expenses. For example, those DEI funds were completely distributed in this fiscal year. However, I have until October 3rd of 2025 to spend them. So we're going to realize those expenses over the next 2 years, or this current fiscal year and the next, and then a little bit even into the the next fiscal year. So I talked about this at my executive committee this morning. We will work to make sure that is as transparent as it can be in in our financials monthly that our board does review. But it's just a little bit difference in what you all see as you get to the end of that budget document that you all were given. We've kind of broken them out into recurring and non-recurring, so we see sort of what we're dealing with in terms of going forward. Any question from you all?
Any questions for Tammy at this time?
This time a few years ago, trimmed it back a day. Like a decision in retrospect, are there any thoughts about changing it again?
Dates of market tends to be one of those things that it depends on who you talk to as to the philosophy that they feel like is the right way to go. My philosophy on that is that no matter what the last day is, it's always going to be what we're going to call an appointment day, a pack-up day. And I hesitate to make it any less than what it is now, even though that last day is hard to work. That is for sure, because a lot of people, especially in outlying buildings, are closing doors and are packing up, and buyers are knocking on doors and can't get in them. I'd like to handle it the other way. I'd like to have so many people here on that last day that they don't want to pack up. And so what we're doing is working hard to get folks here through that entire span so that we do keep them in our community longer, because I think that is important. We are seeing the trend, especially retailers are coming in earlier and earlier. That is a competitive situation where they are trying to lock up suits. See lots of nodding heads that are in the industry probably. They're trying to lock up suits before their competitors, and these days that's incredibly important in this business. So if you and I both own a retail store in Dallas, Texas, I want to beat you to the punch. And so we are seeing them come in earlier and earlier, which makes that end of market tough. We are doing an executive committee strategic planning session the first week in June, and that is one of the things, Councilman, that is on my list for our group to talk about is how do we see these dates going forward. But I feel like we're probably still in a sweet spot there.
Any other questions for Jamie?
Thank you very much.
Jamie, thank you. We appreciate all the presentations from our community partners and all the hard work that they're doing in our city for our economy. And so, next item up, we'll continue our budget discussion with item 2024-206. And for that, we'll have Stephen Howard, our budget director.
Mayor Pro Tem, as Stephen comes, this session is really set aside for us to be able to hear from council and see what questions the group may have. There was a document that was emailed out to all members of council that really summarized the questions that we had heard to date. If the council would like, we can actually, walk through those, or if you would like to kind of just dive straight in, you just let me know. As Stephen's coming, I will ask him to just go through the document that was sent out so we can address some of those questions. And I did want to just highlight a section of our budget document itself. It's page MM5, where it really talks about our general fund. And our general fund budget itself is $147 million, which is a 3.5% increase over the budget that was adopted last year. And, again, there are 5 new positions that are there. One council is already committed to, it's a communication specialist. And then there are 2 others that impact the general fund. The others are in the utility fund. And then also on the next page, if you look at MMA, where it gives you a broad look at our revenues and also our expenditures. If you look at the bottom half where it looks at our expenditures, where you get an idea of our drivers. Clearly our personal expense at 6.9% is what we're showing is increasing. But if you look at our operating, capital outlay, debt service contingency, all of those other line items, we tried to take a hard look at on the front end before it was presented and make some adjustments to those. But again, we'll look at the questions that council has posed to us that we've either gotten an email or conversation, and then determine if there are other questions that have come to mind that you would like for staff to delve into with a little more detail and bring that information back to you. So we'll start with the list that came out. And I think the first one is really looking at our historic trend of the city's tax rate. So we'll start with that.
Yes, kind of middle of the front page of this that went out. Showing High Point, Greensboro, and Guilford County since FY10. And so you can see the fluctuations from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. I'll just kind of note, FY23, City High Point reduced its rate to 61.75 cents. That was the tax rate last year. The proposed increase of 3 cents you see there. You do see a TBD for Greensboro. Greensboro's put their proposed budget out yesterday. They kept their rate the same at 67.25 cents. But if you look at all of them, there's very similar fluctuations, kind of. I wouldn't say anything drastic. The asterisk fiscal years, that is when there was a Guilford County revaluation.
Can we interject as we go, or want to let him finish?
Yeah, you can interject as we go.
Councilman Moore, they did come out, I saw with their budget, and we're speaking directly to tax rate, but I think it's also probably important to mention for anybody that's listening that their water sewer rates are going up a little over 9%. And the Duke Energy has asked, which I think most of their citizens are on Duke Energy, they've asked for an 11% increase.
It did. We had a reduction in our electric rate.
Yes.
It was a 10% reduction in our electric
10%.
rate. We're not proposing any increases in our electric rate as part of this budget. We are in the process of having an analysis done of our electric fund to determine whether or not we would be able to lower our electric rate any further. We want to make sure that any recommendation that we would bring to you is one that we would be able to sustain over a number of years. With the electric asset sale that we had last year, we realized that there may be an opportunity for us to do that. But we wanted to make sure that we had the study completed before we brought a recommendation to council, because we were trying to avoid having a reduction in 1 year, and then council would have to have increases over the next few years to be able to sustain that.
And I think it's important to maybe staff to interject exactly what we did with that restructure, or what we projected the savings to be with what we've done with our excess.
A lot of it is currently going to capital.
Yeah, but what were the numbers that we were thinking? It was like,
From the asset sale?
yeah, it was like $88 million or something in over projected number of years.
You mean until we completely retire the debt in 2034? The estimated savings from the
Yes.
asset sale versus us
Yes.
continue to pay the debt? I don't have that number right off the top of my head, but we can provide that to you.
What asset are we talking about?
We sold a portion of the excess generation in our
Okay,
Catawba
the
nuclear plant.
got it, okay.
But that impacts electric fund, which impacts what we charge for electric rates, which is why we didn't see an increase in our rates this year. And we were able to sustain the reduction that we did last year.
While you're doing that and bringing that number back to us, also, if you would have Bobby to bring back the good work that was done on the renegotiation of our bonds,
Fantastic.
and bring that number to us, or if you have it, you can say it now, or what we did there.
I'll be glad to.
Okay, we'll bring that back.
Thank you.
The next question concerned the increases that were approved in last year's budget for the mayor and city council salaries. So just showed a breakdown of the increase and what the total change. And then the question also went further of kind of what % of the general fund did this increase make up. And so we compared it to the current year's 23-24 adopted budget, and it was 0.06%. The proposed budget for FY25 does not make any changes to city council salary compensation. The proposed budget does include a 4.5% increase to mayor and council's expense allowance.
And the expense allowance is, Councilman Andrew, expense allowance is also out of the general fund.
It is out there.
There's a question about the.
I'm sorry, Stephen, could you,
Sure.
could you talk about that change, but over the course of the fact that it was a 15-year kind of a change, right? It hadn't been adjusted for a decade and a half.
Yes, and so comparisons were shown between High Point's elected official compensation and that of our peer governments, which may increase on an annual basis, may increase periodically, may go 10, 15 years. And so the proposed numbers that were approved by council was the average of all of those jurisdictions together. So it wasn't go to the highest or go to lowest and say, all right, well, what's about the mean? And that's what council ultimately approved. There was a question about the FY23 Guilford County revaluation, in which the city of High Point and Greensboro reduced their tax rates by 3 cents. Guilford County kept their property tax rate the same at 73.05 cents per $100 of valuation. Just clarification, there have been presentations from our financial advisors about potential future debt projects, which could potentially include a new city hall and what the tax rate impacts could be with that type of debt service issuance. Just reiterating and making clear that the proposed increase in this budget is not for that. It's strictly for operations in the general fund. Included just a clarification of the general fund dollars that are in the capital projects fund. So the total general capital projects fund is about $3.6 million, but there's one project that's funded by other funds. And so I talk about local dollars, from sales tax and property taxes going toward capital. It's for the projects listed in this table.
Steve, can you speak to the effect of that reduction coupled with the revaluation, plus also our reduction of our energy rate by 10% during that same kind of period? Just kind of give a sense of that overall effect on our budget for the past year.
From the reval, we're 2 years past that budget, and so we're actually almost closer to the next Guilford County reval. We're kind of right at that.
When is that
point.
scheduled?
Not this coming January, the January following.
And then
so,
we'll take effect into the next budget year.
Right.
Yeah, so just some background on that. Guilford County has been on a 5-year schedule. However, I believe the state came in and said the values, are still already too wide of a gap between what they need to be, and kind of directed Guilford to move your reval schedule up a year.
I was thinking more for those who are listening, how our tax rate is affected by that reval. If we make an adjustment to our tax rate, either up or down, what does that do in terms of our revenues to our budget?
In the 23 reval, we saw an increase in our property tax revenues. The revaluation saw valuations for Guilford County and for High Point go up in the 25 to 30% range. And so while we reduced the rate by 3 cents, with that much increase in your valuations, you're going to, it's just a higher valuation to bring in additional property tax revenue.
So one thing is, Councilman Angelo, that I've been seeing, so people understand that the valuation of the property is increased, therefore we get more income. So what folks are at least communicating to me is that we understand there's inflation. We saw a valuation increase. There's an increase in our normal day-to-day operating expenses by the inflation rate, but at least there's the perception that there's a delta, that we received more than the rate of the inflation increase. So I'd like to be able to communicate that as clearly as we can, as clearly as possible, to show what that delta may or may not be, so that people can understand what we're trying to do here.
We addressed that piece as well, and we looked at the 2023 revaluation and what drove the budget and how those expenditures were spent. There was about an additional $12 million that came in over the course of that reval. And on page 7 of the document that we provided to council, it talks about how the budget accounted for those additional dollars. The first item that we had there is that there was a cost of living increase that was approved by the board, and it shows you what the impact on the tax rate was for the cost of living. We also increased our minimum wage at that time to $15 an hour, and it shows you what the tax implication is there. So there are a number of items that were done in previous budgets that showed how the additional revenue from the reval was allocated to city projects. A good portion of those were for staffing costs. We had some costs associated with fuel and vehicle replacements that some of those had been delayed as part of the pandemic. We used ARPA funds to cover some, and then we used all the funds from reval. General operating around computer and software licensing, fire apparatus replacement, some debt service, and then some transfers for transit and also our capital fund. So if you look at the expenses that are identified there in the table, it shows you how the city accounted for the additional revenue above revenue neutral and how it was plugged into the city's budget.
Okay. And obviously, there are several things that were out of the city's control, like cost of living allowance and the $15 minimum wage was sort of mandated, is that correct?
That was the desire of the council at the time,
Desire
was
of
to
the
increase
council at the time,
to increase the minimum wage to 15, and that was something that we were seeing to try to help with some of the losses that we were receiving and the turnover that we were having in some of our frontline employees and frontline staff. One of the things that is really out of the city's control is the requirement that we have to make to the local government retirement systems, those
Okay.
retirement
That's what I was
contributions.
gonna say next.
There's a state mandated amount that each municipality has to pay, that is the employer contribution. And there's also a separate contribution that employees make of 6% out of their salaries to support their retirement as well. But the local government portion is mandated by the state that we put that into the retirement system. And I've forgotten the number from this year, but the driver from this year of what that cost is that we're absorbing, Stephen, do you remember that one? It's in our,
It's in the message.
that year it was 1.2 million, which was almost a penny on the tax rate.
Is this an annual review by the state? Do they require you to make that review annually if they make the change?
We have an allocation that we have to make each year, so they tell us what that amount is.
So you don't know?
We don't know, but we know we're gonna have to factor
You know
that
it's
in.
coming.
And it has been increasing each year,
Right.
what the employer contribution has been
Certainly.
increasing every year. So those costs are fixed costs that we have to build into our base
Mm-hmm.
budget before we start looking at our requests that are coming in from our departments and staff for
It's
capital.
a fixed cost, but the amount could.
It could go
possibly-
up.
It could, the amount can increase every year.
It could increase it has been increasing every year.
year.
It has been increasing every year.
Okay.
It's been going up about 0.75% per year for, I'll say regular employees, and then about 1% per year for sworn law enforcement.
So I think, Madam Manager, you said every $1 million is a penny on the tax rate. Is that?
One
is that
penny on the tax rate is about 1.3 million,
1.3 million.
is about 1.3 million, and that can change as the value of your
Absolutely.
property goes up, but
Certainly.
yes. Right now it's 1.3.
Thank you.
Well, we're making notes that are hoping to get our message as we try to massage to a final budget. I brought it up before, but we'll bring it up again, that by delivering, and my memory is, for those that were on council last year, correct me if I'm wrong, that the initial presentation to council was for a tax increase. And we asked for options. And the staff worked very hard and came back with an option that we could, and we heard a lot of the same refrain at public comment that we heard and are hearing this year. The only problem is we've had another 12 months to deal with this inflation that was supposed to be transitory, and federal interest rates that people have the perception that are high, but they're historically not high. So we're fighting not only real true challenges for a lot of people in this room and everywhere else, but we're fighting a philosophy that has been created over time. I mean, we went for several years, almost 14 years, where the federal interest rate was hovering at 2% or below.
Yeah.
And it's set a generational precedent that was supposed to be normal, and is not. So, for staff to sharpen their pencils and come back to try to meet the request of that council and pass a budget that was helpful to those, to that ask from our citizens, shows me that we got a really good staff.
On page 3, you've seen these charts in last week's presentation on the the proposed increases to police officer and firefighter pay and how we compare with other jurisdictions. I'll just note, I said Greensboro got their budget out yesterday. They are increasing their entire pay plan, all their grades by 4%, and so those numbers for Greensboro, for police officer and firefighter will be increased 4%, so they will remain at the top. Winston-Salem was not put their budget out, and that's been kind of the other jurisdiction that through this study saw that was kind of a key market point we were behind in trying to get ahead of. And so we're anxiously waiting to see what they do, just to see how this chart will look after they get their budget out. Page 4 and 5, there's a little bit of fund balance. I don't know, Bobby, if there's anything you want to touch on with this.
Not really. I hope the narrative describes it a little bit. There's the 8% rule that you were asked about is kind of the perceived rule. So as long as anyone can remember, beginning in fiscal 21, we began being measured against these financial performance indicators, which is that 25%. I think the reason they arrived at that is 3 months. We're in the highest tier, so 25% is the lowest for municipalities. And you can see they put out some statistics, and I think these are from the June 30, 2020 fiscal year that, maybe we didn't include those. Oh, we did on the other page, I'm sorry. On the next page, it shows the kind of median fund balance available for, specifically for us, the comparison would be units with electrical systems of 50,000 population and above. So you can see where they have measured actual fund balance available in what they consider our peer group. And then, you have our historical fund balance information as well.
I think we're at 30.7%, right?
Yes. Yep.
The general fund balance is at 2%.
The fund balance policy is 10%.
So we're actually at 18, right?
We are currently at 18% according to how our policy measures it. And then for the financial performance indicator measurement, we're at around 30%, where that minimum is 25%.
Can staff speak to the philosophy that we have had concerning our general fund and how we use it? Because there have been some questions or comments about possibly reducing that fund and moving some of that money and to try to offset this potential increase.
I'll speak briefly to that, and then I will ask Eric, as we sometimes call Eric, our resident historian, as he has been here for the longest number of years, over 12 years with us, and was our budget director. But the city has not used fund balance to balance our budgets for at least 10 years. The philosophy around the use of fund balance has been that it is for reserves or emergency situations. Typically, we dip into fund balance if there are large acquisitions that need to take place, if there might be a legal settlement that might need to take place that we don't want to address our operations. And our philosophy has been that we use those if there is like storms or natural disasters. Typically, if there are ice storms, hurricanes, or things that hit our area, we have to be in a position to quickly mobilize and expend funds to get our city back up and running. We do receive some federal reimbursement for those typically, but it can take anywhere from 9 to 12 months before those reimbursements come back in. So the city has to make sure that we're in a position to be able to float those expenses for a period of time and still operate. So that has been the general philosophy for at least the last decade. However, the question has come to staff, can we use, fund balance to fill our operational gap? The answer is yes. That's a decision the council can make. And staff just wants to make sure that if there's going to be a change in how we've traditionally operated, that we understand that for next year's budgets are an annual document, but we also realize that they're based on some long-term commitments that we have. So for the following year, we'll need to be either making sure we're putting money back into fund balance to bring those numbers back up to the benchmarks for a community our size. We need to either be making sure that we're making operational cuts in our budgets that we can sustain over a period of time, or we realize that starting with next year's budget, we're putting ourselves in a little bit of a hole of trying to fill that gap when we start for the following year's budget. So there are options, and council can make a decision to do things a little bit differently. But we just want to make sure that we're providing the different nuances associated with each option to you.
So we put ourselves potentially at a deficit, and we would have to consistently look at interjecting fund balance funds into the budget to avoid the increases down the road.
Potentially, yes. And some cities, do budget some portion of fund balance. The city of High Point has been an organization where each year we typically put money back into fund balance. And those types of things really become important when you start to think about the projects that are down the road, when the city starts to issue debt, and we start to have our bond rating agencies looking at us. They're gonna look at what our policies and our practices are, and whether or not we're using
That's what I was
fund
gonna
balance
ask next.
to handle our operations.
How would that strategy potentially affect our bond rating if we were to pursue that option?
Yes, so we do, if you all, I know you fondly remember our financial advisors presentation, but there are years, especially in the issuance years for some of those larger debt issuances, where we know that we will spend down some of that debt service fund balance. And as I talk about the narrative, the LGC combines that with our general fund balance to create this this measure that we're talking, when we talk about the 25%. I know it's very confusing, and I promise it's a new thing for us, and nobody has written a 25% policy yet. But I know that we're gonna have more conversations about it as we get concerned about making sure we maintain that. But it is a planned usage.
And it's a planned usage, but I think that's also part of, as we're leading into our budget season, we do our analysis with our financial advisor in March so that council can have a good idea of what those capital projects looks like and have an idea of when they think we may need to draw down on that fund balance. Because we want that to be kind of front of mind as we're moving into these decisions.
So in essence, we could damage our bond rating. We would have problems replenishing our fund balance, and potentially create longer-term issues with us being able to issue bonds if that happens.
Potentially, or
Potentially.
tighter impact
Tighter
when you go
impact.
back to issue those bonds.
Yeah.
The affordability model that you all saw was
Yeah.
based on a certain amount of fund balance being available
Yeah.
to be used in those future years.
Yeah.
And that would impact the model.
I have a question. So would there be an amount that could just reduce the tax rate increase by a little bit and still keep our bond rating and stuff secure? Like to not give as much as we needed to not have the 3 cent, but maybe just do a 2 cent? Is there a number in between that could possibly kind of work a little without hurting us?
I like the idea and the thought, but I think as we talk about the 1 cent, we talk about the percentage, we also need to convert it into what we're talking about in dollars. And the current ask is somewhere around $6.25 a month. I think is on a $250,000 house.
Right.
So,
Seven.
again, it's tough times out there, I get it. And trust me, I struggle. This is my 11th budget, and I think I've voted for a tax increase once. So you look at the personal side for sure, but you gotta look at the pragmatic side too of where we're going.
And what about the idea of sharing an email? I mean, if using part of the general fund balance to pay for the capital expenses, is it not the same idea as the one pocket and the other? I mean, how is that different than, where all those just accounting things, like the money's here versus here, but it's still, the city's not actually spending money, I guess, right?
I'll speak to capital. Our capital projects are one-time in nature, yes, but I would say our budgeted capital funding is a recurring expense at this point. It's about $2.5 million per year. If you look at the outline years of the capital plan for general capital, you'll see numbers a lot higher than $2.5 million. We will not have funding to cover those, and so it's become, in essence, a recurring expense because we fund it every year just through kind of general dollars. Other governments have other options for their capital funding that we just aren't able to utilize.
That one pocket to the other situation was specifically our borrowing our internal borrowing that we've done for specific projects. That's where we're repaying the electric fund for the Catalyst project that I believe is around $440,000 or so. That's what that is when we talked about one pocket to the other. It's just repaying our electric system for funds that we borrowed to invest in our.
Use the general fund balance to pay the $480,000.
You absolutely can. That would be the same as appropriating it for police salaries or anything else next year.
Well, and I think we also, we don't want to appropriate recurring salaries and things like that from the general fund. So I think that was like already, that was off the table. I don't think anybody suggested that or cutting anybody's salary. I think the main thing is like, is everything on this list an emergency? Because I know that, you know, however many people come here, there's even more sentiment out in the community. And if I was listening to this meeting right now, I would say the city is collecting my taxes to pay for things that I don't get to enjoy. If I'm, you know, in a certain part of the city. And I think we need to hear a little bit of what they're saying, because I also don't want to do 3, but I also know we can't do 0. So I'd love to hear some options for in between. And I think I'm feeling like there's scare tactics in here, but it's very theoretical that I don't see some things on this list that are, we have to do. Bridges, we have to do. You know, things that are keeping our water safe for our citizens, we have to do. But there are some things in here that we don't have to do, that we are choosing, because it would be really nice for our city to grow and continue to stay on this track. However, do we need to take that on at 3 cents right now? I don't know. I have not heard an argument that we do.
Well, I think if we look at the long term, I'm sorry, Greg, please.
The arguments in the presentation that they've given us, it's in the recommendation that they presented to us. So it's up to us to come back and say, well, you know, that.
But I think that's where we haven't heard an argument for the other side. I think what the conversation, well, and that's why I'm saying it, is because I do want to be clear that, you know, there's not, to me, this is not the time when people are eating cereal for meals or no meals at all, you know, it's a hard time to say that to someone.
It is. It was hard. It would have been hard last year too. And so I'm open to hear what you want to cut.
Well, here's just throwing some things out as an example, Councilman Andrew. So, page MM3, City of High Point expenditures. The capital outlay for fiscal year 24 is $47,137,000. So basically, it's a $10 million increase on capital outlay year to year. Is there anything there that is, I mean, I know we have to spend certain things, but is there any delta on that? And then another example, MM15, the electric budget summary, the PayGo capital for fiscal year 24 is $9.8 million. It's had a 162% increase to 25.8. I'd like some clarifications on why that is increased that much. And I mean, again, I'm not saying that it's unnecessary, but just looking at the numbers, it's big. And if there's a justification, I'd like to be able to communicate that to the public.
There are 2 pieces before you address that. Any adjustments that we make to the electric fund would impact the general fund and the tax rate recommendation that would need to be made there. Those are separate funds, so the tax rate increase that we're recommending doesn't impact the electric fund, it doesn't impact utility. On, you know, looking at the projects that we have listed here, I hear the sentiment around, you know, kind of scare tactics. That was one thing that was mentioned at the public comment session, that it's as if, you know, we don't do this and we're not gonna have police and fire at our house. That's not necessarily the approach that staff took with this. We were looking at where our largest drivers were for the cost, and it's in our personnel. which is why I pointed to that first chart when we were starting, is that when we started our budget, we looked at operations first, and every one of those has been reduced, but the personnel costs are the ones that we can't necessarily get rid of as easily. We do go ahead and budget in a certain amount of vacancy savings because we realize that all these positions are not going to be filled, and we realize that we have a certain amount of turnover that comes in the organization. I think that where we can focus is, you know, there are 3 positions that are recommended in this budget. You know, do we want to keep all 3 of those? One of them we've committed to with our streaming of meetings. There's one that is associated with our GIS manager that's in there. That's one that staff would recommend we move forward with. There's also one for a buyer. As we are buying and procuring more things, it's taken us a little bit more time. The process that we have to work through, it would be helpful for us to have that on financial services. You know, those are things that, you know, could be taken out of the budget, but if you take those 2 positions out, you're talking about roughly $200,000 or so for those 2 positions. That doesn't move the needle much on the tax rate. If we're going to move those, thinking about the interfund transfer may be one, the paying back the loan might be an option, or looking at, you know, capital projects that we have on this sheet, if there are ones that council doesn't feel like we need to continue pursuing, which those are also in this chart here that have been highlighted. That could be a starting place for us to talk about projects. Some of these are ones that are already in progress, like the first one on the list is commercial use kitchen. The shared commercial use kitchen, we're kind of in design on that. We also have some federal funds, a federal earmark that came in for that project. And we have the firing range that's there, several parks and recreation programs, you know, a couple of things at the library, you know, some transportation pieces there. So there is room for us to, you know, delay some of these projects or capital if council would like to do so. But we just really need to know what you all are comfortable with or what you all want us to explore.
Are we gonna actually be using, I mean, the shared use kitchen is not gonna be built in this fiscal year, is it?
It's not going to be built in this fiscal year, but we have to get through the design of it, and that's what we're doing right now.
All right, but I mean, there's $4 million already for it, right?
There is. And we have starting to get some preliminary numbers in, and there's some concern that 4 million might not be enough to take that project over the finish line. I mean, we, you know, as we're starting with these projects, we've made commitments to them, so
And not to sound, anyway, I still don't see the value of this, and I know it's too late to go down this road, but what was the intent of this project? Because there's, you know, $2 million of ARPA funds toward it, and then, you know, we've got more on this, and then it's saying, you know, what I'm hearing is that it may not be enough. That's somewhat scary to me.
Well, I mean, not being a council member, before I got on council, I mean, this has been a discussion in town. I was trying to do it with the foundation, but I was trying to do it on cheap. Because there's a definite demand and sort of the food entrepreneurship is a big thing. I mean, for us, we were trying to take grassroots folks who thought they made good cookies and we wanted to take them on the whole process. And so it's been a long interest. I mean, it's a definite demand for commercial shared use kitchen. They're maxed out in Winston and Greensboro as well. So I mean, I think that was kind of the impetus.
Yeah.
The city's pursuit, again, I wasn't on council.
No, and also, when you talk about food entrepreneurship, it also talks about how do we continue to offer amenities and things to our citizens downtown organically. Because if we're recruiting businesses locally, those are all coming with potential incentives. We're growing business locally, that's a different calculation. That's a different hometown calculation. And so the idea behind that was to give the small entrepreneur an opportunity to scale at a much defrayed cost. And so that gives them an opportunity to grow their business locally, eventually translating into potentially brick and mortar restaurants. And so as a long-term economic development tool, that's how we grow you know, the amenities that we offer our citizens. And so it certainly has its potential, you know, but we're dealing with costs around every single thing increasing. I wanted to go back to the point of labor costs. When we talk about police and fire and staffing, it's not just the fact of having people in positions. We have to think about this from an operational capacity standpoint. There's a service level that our citizens demand. You're talking about permitting, you're talking about all the things that our businesses need to go through to get up and running, the loss of a person or maybe two impacts that. So it delays businesses coming online, it delays projects from getting started for my development community. And so it's not just the simple act of saying we're gonna reduce this to save money. What does that reduction cost us in future commerce? So we have to think of it in that scale, that we're not just impacting our budgets, we're also thinking about the operational capacity of our staff, and it also impacts our partners in the community. Because here's the reality, if it takes them an extra 90 days to get permits because we don't have staff, that could imperil a project. We just broke ground on Palladium South on that road. We've been working on that thing for 4+ years. And that's a lot of hard work with our staff. And imagine if we didn't have that staff available to meet that demand, that's a $50+ million project that probably would have been shuttered. And so we have to think about how we deliver service, not just to our citizens, but also to businesses. And so we're not only competing with other municipalities for the people that work with us, we're competing with the private sector. I don't know if anyone's tried to hire anybody lately, but there's competition in the labor market like we've never seen. This is a very tight labor market. So if we're not sensitive to that, we can imperil the service levels that we offer to our citizens. And if you think they're mad about a potential 3-cent tax increase,
Wait till their water.
wait till their water is not on, wait till their trash is not picked up. And so we have to be sensitive to the idea that our job here is to make sure that we provide the best service at the best value.
Hey, Mayor Pro Tem Holmes,
Yes.
can I be here?
Yeah, of course.
Hey, I appreciate everyone's discussion on this, and, there's quite a few things I've been taking notes on here, so y'all bear with me, I'm trying to be as succinct as I can, as I touch each piece. Mayor Pro Tem, you hit me on the head just now when we talked about the cost of doing business. Although government is for the people, by the people, at the end of the day, it is still a business organization that has to employ people to be able to lead and operationalize the services that we all need as residents. I've seen comments from folks who say things such as, people are struggling, government folks just have to, be okay with what they have. There should be no increases whatsoever. And I hear that, right? Even if all 9 of us 100% agree with that, that doesn't mean that every employee is going to just choose to stay working for this organization. At the end of the day, because the labor market is so competitive, people will choose to go where they feel that it's in their best interest. This is America, free market enterprise. They have the right to do that. As much as I'd love to be able to control that cost, it's not a cost that we can control right now. I think there's some other pieces I'm hearing, and I appreciated Councilman Moore's point when we think about the tax increase, and not that any increase is nominal, but I think we do want to put it in real numbers so that way we can be pragmatic about what we're asking folks to do. If you have a house that's worth $250,000, at this point, what we're asking you to contribute towards the future of our city in terms of having the personnel we need, investing in the roads and the water and the sewer that we need, to think about housing and so many other pieces, we're asking you to contribute at this point an additional $7 a month. And don't get me wrong, I don't think that asking anyone for an increase is a situation that's not to be taken seriously, but I think we do have to do a cost-benefit analysis of this. Are we willing, in the short term, to be able to say we're not willing to ask for an extra $7 a month on average from our residents to be able to ensure that we can solve one of the biggest issues that we've been hearing since we started governing during this term? The very first thing our manager shared with us was that we have vacancies that quite frankly are at an uncomfortable level, and that we are no longer competitive. I spoke to a gentleman who was a member of the High Point Police Department who now works for the Guilford County Sheriff's Department. He said he didn't have to leave his house, and his commute is just as short as it used to be, but he gets paid $5,000 to $10,000 more. All he had to do was go right up the street. And he said that there are many more folks having that same exact conversation right now because they know that High Point keeps saying they want to do it, but High Point won't actually do it. I think that there's some other pieces I want to get to just to uplift what the manager and her team have shared with us. When we keep our rate lower than everyone else's, we also forego our share of sales tax from Guilford County. And we don't forego it entirely, but we do forego a portion that should be coming to us. The sales tax equation is based on what percentage of the revenue you get from property taxes. And it works in the inverse of what you think it would. You would think if you got more on property taxes, then maybe they give you, a haircut on what you get in sales tax. And if you got less in property taxes, maybe they give you more. That's not the way it works. If you contribute more to property tax, they're going to give you more in sales tax. So when we choose to cut our property tax, we're also inherently choosing to cut our sales tax. So when we cut it a few years ago, that was really a 2-for-1. I think there's another piece I heard here, and I want to be careful when folks say that there's work being done that doesn't touch parts of the city. I can understand why people would say that, but this is where I think it is our job and our responsibility to articulate why the work that we've been doing to revitalize the core of our city does in fact touch every single resident. To be clear, downtown revitalization is not about a Friday night hot dog and Coke. That ain't what it's about. It ain't so you can take your kids to Boxcar Arcade and so you can go to a baseball game. Downtown revitalization is because our tax base literally was declining. No one wanted to be in the core of our city because there was not demand to be in the core. And if there's no demand to be in the core, not only do you see your property values begin to decline, but as property values begin to decline, tax revenue then is at a threat of declining. And so then we're going to be having this discussion. You choose to do revitalization or not, you come to this discussion because now you've got holes in terms of revenue, and we're talking about layoffs or we're talking about tax rate increases. So to be clear, when folks chose to do core city revitalization, yes, we knew it was going to have some good sort of social benefits, but it really was an economic business case made for why revitalization was so important. So I do want to make sure that everyone gets a chance to articulate that. Councilman Andrew, you asked about the shared use kitchen. There's some real good research done on this. Mayor Jay Wagner, my predecessor, went to the Bloomberg and Harvard program, and that's actually where this idea came about. I think himself, our city manager, some members from her team went to New York City, and there's a lot of good research done around what kind of project will move the needle and be another catalyst for core city revitalization, and that's where this project came from. And we were blessed to receive a 7-figure investment from our federal government. I do encourage folks, if you've not read that proposal and what all the actual benefits will come from that, please do. Because the other thing is you're not just activating for entrepreneurs, and trust me, that's fantastic. Me, Patrick, and Monica saw that in Cincinnati last week, and they're doing incredible work to support food entrepreneurs. Not only are we doing that, but you're also talking about revitalizing an area of town, to your point, Councilmember Cook, that has been underinvested. The south side of High Point right now still is home to the poorest census tract in the state of North Carolina. Us doing an investment on West Green is going to help us transform that entire side of our community. We're also putting a greenway right there, and we're also looking at other investments. These things have to work together in a vacuum. We cannot simultaneously hear folks say to us, you're never investing in our side of town, and then when opportunities come to invest, we don't choose to do it. This has been an incredible opportunity that multiple councils have looked at, and we can't just look at it from one facet. It is a multifaceted opportunity. I'm almost done here, y'all. Please bear with me. There was a note made about our bond rating, and I think we're all on the same page about wanting to keep a strong bond rating, so I won't waste a lot of time there. The other piece I do want to highlight, because I've heard folks mention some of the positions that we could cut. For everyone who I've heard reach out for the first time ever in the past 3 weeks about this tax rate increase, it's my first time ever hearing from them. As many of those we could count, I think I've heard from that many, if not more, of folks who said, why don't you video stream meetings? And people have been saying that for quite some time. And so yes, I agree, it's important to hear what folks are saying this month about the budget, but as we've been debating, what we've been hearing from residents for years about transparency, as well as what we've been hearing from residents, developers, business owners about efficiency. Mayor Pro Tem Holmes, the way we just laid out talking about not having some of these positions in place, I can't imagine slowing down our purchasing process. I can't imagine slowing down what we're doing with GIS mapping, and I can't imagine saying that something that we've been committed to in terms of values and transparency, that we can't do the very necessary thing to move that forward. I'll be clear, I voted in favor of the tax rate decrease several years ago whenever the opportunity came up, because I did think it was a good opportunity. In hindsight, what we all now are seeing is that no other government chose to do that and stay there. Greensboro chose to do it, but immediately after 1 year, they realized, oh crap, we are now no longer able to foot the bill in terms of personnel, capital costs, and so many other things. So Greensboro immediately, within 1 year, raised it right back up because they knew everyone else was beginning to outpace them. we are being outpaced. So whether we choose to make a decision or not, we're going to continue to be outpaced, and we'll continue to sort of miss that, I think, an opportunity, an incredible opportunity, if we don't find a way to lean in on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Jefferson. And I think your point is well noted, that we're asking to put it back where it was prior to the cut. We're not asking, it was a 3-cent cut, we're asking to put it back 3 cents. We're not asking for 4, we're not asking for 5, we're asking for the 3 that we cut. And I think that should be noted.
Well, to interject, I understand that, but what people are going to see is that the valuation of their home has increased from the last time to now. So we're getting it back to where it was. I mean, getting it back up 3 cents. It's, you know,
Yeah,
you're gonna see dollars and cents. You know, I was thinking this then and then now.
No, Councilman Andrew, you absolutely have a very valid point on that. But to Mayor Jefferson's point, to Councilman Moore's point that he made at the meeting the other night, we made that was a political decision that we made to bring relief at a time that we knew we were going to be potentially damaged by that rate reduction. We did that at the behest of citizens who called us and said, hey, this reevaluation is tough. And we knew that. Staff gave us all the information that we needed to say that we were going to be right where we are right now. And we made that decision. And so for us now to know that the decision that we made, we're going to have these type of consequences, and continue down that same road, that if we don't make this decision, we're going to imperil further. And I'm just going to say, if you think it's difficult to ask for 3 cents, if we continue to not have the revenue that we need, it's going to be impossible to ask for 4.5. And that's what we're looking at if we don't make some type of adjustment here on the revenue side.
To Mayor's point, to put a number to it, I believe that our sales tax revenue loss on the year was $815,000 in revenue. I think spending, even in these times, is probably going to be up next year. Our population has increased 1,400 people by census, so the demand on service and personnel is going to be that much more. And, you know, let's just assume there's a 10% increase or so in that sales number. Then, you know, you're looking at $900,000, almost 1 cent on the tax rate that we're going to option out of. And I'll fight like crazy for the next year going forward. If things change and things get better economically, that we will maybe reduce taxes again. We'll fight for it every time. But when you look at it from a business perspective, this is hard to operate in.
We have the kind of the list here, but I think it might be just most helpful for, you know, staff to be able to just hear if there are other questions from council or other areas that, or you know, want us to look at the capital piece again, so that we can know what changes need to be made or not, and be prepared.
Madam Manager, there's the piece that I mentioned to you, and this is something that we haven't yet discussed yet as a council, so y'all forgive me that this is my first time really bringing it up, but this is a relatively young conversation anyways. We campaigned last fall, most of us knowing that housing was such a critical issue. Many of us talked about the opportunities to address it. And coming into this term, I can tell you the amount of meetings I've been in, Andrew's been in, several members of council and staff have been in regarding housing have been, I think, really fruitful and really informative. There are efforts right now that are beginning to coalesce for private funding to help us to address this issue. But nonetheless, every model that we've looked at around the country lets us know that the public sector has to be involved and they have to probably be involved in a consistent and somewhat meaningful way. And I know the manager and her team wants to do a housing study or commission on that will be able to help us know exactly in terms of our inventory what we're lacking when it comes to supply of housing, whether it's the missing middle, or how much affordable housing we don't have, so on and so forth. That study will come out, and what it will reveal is, hey, we need X amount of housing and this amount of funding to go towards it. You look at how every study's been done, what it still comes back to is how you can finance it. And I can tell you from the conversations we've been having with folks within the private sector, they're prepared to do something pretty Herculean to help us with this effort. But public sector, we're gonna have to step up too. There are some examples of this. You look at what Greensboro's done for the past 3 decades with their Nussbaum Fund, and how they every year contribute a portion of their tax rate simply to trying to support the development of housing. And in our point, I don't believe we've taken it on yet. I believe that you look at our community development and housing department, led by Member Wilson, they do an incredible job of maximizing what they have. But if you read in the paper, their HUD funding just got reduced. It just got reduced again. And we've seen that sort of year over year, where that can happen. It puts it out of their hands. But even with what they had, it's hard for them to move the needle with that. Those are really just dollars that they leverage to support tax credits and so many other things. I think at some point what this council may be considering, I know this is a very new discussion, and if we have the appetite for it, I think it would be warranted because of what we've heard from our constituents. But looking at what portion of our tax revenue going forward, could we make some bold commitment to housing? And not only is it what we heard during campaign season, but that 2045 plan that we just approved, that we know is going to be really transformative for our community, it will require us doing housing in a very considerable way. And so that's a piece that I wanted to uplift. I know I'm just dropping it on everyone, but I feel sort of it's our duty to make sure that we uplift the things that are important. And I will say this last point. I don't know that we can simply say we're ready to address that at a later date and figure out what the revenue is. I think that it was such a prevalent issue, and we're still hearing it now from people, that I think we got to show that we prioritize it as an issue. So that's my last point. Thank y'all.
Mr. Mayor, really quickly, so are you saying that that a portion, say for instance, if it's 3 cents, that we take 0.25 and set it aside for a fund for potential housing construction? Is that what you're asking? Is that what you're saying, suggesting here?
Yeah. I think set aside something, and it doesn't have to be a big lump amount. I think that number you just said actually sounds pretty good.
Yeah.
Greensboro does, I think, at least 1 penny towards it.
Yeah.
But maybe what our appetite is at this point is out of that 3 cents that the manager showed us, I'd love to see where if that 0.25 of a penny could go towards housing, what would that look like, Madam Manager?
Okay, so for Greensboro, for Greensboro, they do set aside 1 cent. We try to look at this today. This started in 2004, 2005, I do believe, when they started setting aside some funds. I do think that it would be a stretch for us to be able to jump and allocate a penny of the tax rate of the increased tax rate that we're proposing to do this. I just went back and pulled up while the mayor was talking. We gave some options of how we may do a reduction, like thinking about the 1 cent. These are tough for us. Again, I would not recommend that we defer any of the salary adjustments, just because if we defer it this year, then that means we're trying to make up for that full amount in our next year's budget. But if we were to reallocate the funds that are being used to pay for some of the subsidies for the parking fund, or some portion of the capital, and take some portion of that, then council could reallocate if you wanted to start with, maybe that $0.25. But again, you all have got to figure out if that's there's some options here, so it's got to come from somewhere if we're going to add this thing on.
I want to say first and foremost, I would support 2 cents towards a housing fund because that's my number one thing. And I think, I love that. I just don't understand after we just heard, where now 0.25 cents is coming from. What are you willing to cut if you're going to take 0.25 to put towards housing?
Amanda, I wasn't suggesting that we do anything. I was trying to get an understanding of what the model looked like.
Okay, but I'm trying to understand what you're suggesting. So
no, I'm just saying how would we fund that housing?
That.
No, I was just saying, I was asking how the apportionment would work from the tax rate.
That's a whole new conversation that we haven't had.
Yeah, and Amanda, Councilwoman Cook, I don't think we're suggesting that we take that on in this particular budget. But I'm thinking that maybe what we potentially look at is maybe subsequent budgets, how we do something on housing, which all of us said that we wanted to do.
I feel frustrated because I feel like there have been people who have taken what we were given and really tried to work to find creative solutions to achieve everything that's in here with also providing what the public has asked for. I have not heard anybody from the public ask for us to have an increase so far.
You never
To
will.
have, and I'm not expecting you, but I'm saying to have as much as we can possibly have without saying no to anyone, really. And I haven't really heard a response to the people who put forth that effort. And now this is adding a whole nother element to the conversation at the last minute that I don't understand if that could be achieved, what the mayor or whoever has recommended that, what you're gonna cut to achieve that this time. Or why we're talking about it. I'm just really struggling.
Yeah, Amanda, or Councilwoman Cook, I'll be glad to chime in on that. When I called, and I asked the manager, and I told her that I'd bring this up, I'm fully aware that we have not discussed this yet. And I'm transparent, y'all. I think if you know me, I didn't get into this to be cool and calculated. I didn't get into this to be a career-long politician. These conversations have been happening fairly quickly in terms of what's happening. And I just received word at how fast some of our private sector partners are actually moving on this discussion. And so again, in spite of your frustration, I mean, I could have very well not said anything about housing, but I don't think you all would want me to not bring up things that we're hearing. So I bring it up, and it's for discussion. I don't think we have to finger point or blame anyone for where it's going to fit. It's a discussion point. If you feel that people have shared solutions that no one's responded to, I know every single person who's emailed me, I've emailed them back. And of the council members who have shared some of their solutions, I've done my best to try to peek through it. I've spoken to all of them and spoken to staff to try to see how we can get it figured out. I think that where we are right now, we're in our second budget session. This is the time where we discuss things. It's not at the 11th hour. We're still technically 39 days from where a budget technically has to be passed. And our goal is to get it passed 12 days from now. But if we don't get it past 12 days from now, we still have some cushion. But the goal is to say, what have we heard from residents and how do we bring that forward? And that's a duty that we all have.
Well,
sorry if bringing up housing is finished.
Yeah, it seems to me that this is not something that we need to address in this budget. It's too late. We've gone through this rabbit hole. However lofty the goals we think housing will be, I don't consider it to be something that we have to deal with this year's budget. If it was something that we had from the beginning, maybe, but I kind of share Councilman Cook's frustration. It's somewhat last second here, so I think this is something that needs to be tabled for the next fiscal year.
Well, I would like to say that, so respectfully, I disagree because we know that housing nationally is crisis level. We've got growth that's getting ready to happen here with the Toyota battery and stuff, and if we don't meet those housing needs, we'll lose it, and we'll never get opportunity to gain it back. So I'm really glad that you brought up, I mean, I understand y'all's concerns, but, you know, like he said, this is definitely not the nth hour. And I think we all, I mean, housing is super, super important. So I'm kind of glad that you did bring it up. I mean, I wasn't expecting it, and, but I think that we definitely need to have a serious deep dive into how we're going to increase our housing
And I
stock.
think we have time for that,
Yeah.
but I don't think we have time in this budget. We don't, there's still some elements of what the private sector is working on this, that they're not totally ready yet.
Okay.
And, you know, you can bring it forward till you have it, at least a little more nailed down, than where they are right now. But the issue's out there, and we can, you know, we can make adjustments and amendments at times, you know, when we need to, but obviously we won't change the rate.
There-
But,
Councilmember Moore, and Mayor, there were some comments, I think it came up as part of our strategic plan discussion because housing and funding for housing was one of the areas where we hadn't identified a neighborhood to work in, which was one of council's priorities. And when we received a portion of our ARPA allocation, we did talk about setting aside a portion of that to be able to support some housing initiatives. Some of that was talked about before we released our application to support agencies through the funding. And then it was again talked about when council was reviewing that, is to, if there was any funds that were not given to agencies, can we reserve some of those funds to be able to use for housing, although there wasn't a plan or a strategy for that. Those are the ongoing conversation that we had about identifying a funding source to be able to help with housing. The concern that I raised at that point is that our housing needs, quite frankly, are reoccurring needs.
Yeah.
And the ARPA funding was one-time money that was coming into the system. So even if we set aside a portion of ARPA, we would still need to have a follow-up conversation at some point to determine how do we sustain that over a longer period of time, realizing what some of the needs were. And I think that the funding that was set aside that was not allocated by the Finance Committee, it was with that thought in mind of, is there some other initiative that the council might want to fund or support moving forward, and that could be a source for that.
Well, Councilmember Johnson, Mayor Jefferson, I agree completely with you. It's a great idea, honestly. I think we do need to, if we're asking other folks to invest, I think the city needs to do their part also. So I don't know how that would look right now, but that is a great idea that we do need to take a deeper dive into.
Yeah, and the one thing I want to say about what our role is here in economic development is we have to manage trends. And the days that the private sector is going to move without us is over. There's no more waiting for the private sector to do it. It's public-private. This is how things are done today. There's no way that any company, any business is going to invest in this city if we don't have some skin in the game. And for us to be able to capture and manage the growth of this city, we have to take bold steps alongside of our partners. And we have to keep the trust. And so when we think about those things in terms of especially providing housing for our citizens and future citizens, we have to be creative. And the one thing that you don't want to do is you don't want to have to adjust to a trend when it's on top of people. And we have to, and so Mayor Jefferson, thank you for bringing that to us, even though we may not address it right now. The fact that we have it on our radar means that we can plan for it. And we won't be caught flat-footed when that trend comes upon us, and we'll have a much better, more detailed, more cost-effective plan because we're thinking ahead. And I think that's what our citizens demand, that we won't come back to them and say, hey, the Toyota plan is up and running. Now all of a sudden we have 3,000 people who are looking to move into the city of High Point and we don't have housing to provide them because we waited. And at the end of that, I think we're failing our citizens if we're not at least doing our due diligence on the trends that are happening in our economy.
Well, if I can add to that, Councilman Holmes, maybe I'm showing a little bit of my age, but it goes back to the philosophy piece too, and I think you're correct.
Yeah.
I think more and more, and I don't think it's good.
No.
In my opinion, I don't think it's good.
Certainly.
But the private sector looks to the public sector like there's some kind of inanimate object, but in reality, the public is the government. I don't think it's good business practice. It's just like incentives. Incentives are things for years and years and years and years I don't like. But they keep growing and they keep growing and they keep growing. And if you don't participate in the game, then you're gonna go by the wayside. I think it's got repercussions
Sure.
in a few years after I'm dead, that we won't like. But, that's just a philosophical piece, but it goes back to the other things that I was talking about, and to Councilman Andrew's point. I get the understanding on the 300 Oak. I have the same in my philosophy, which is different from some others, but ARPA dollars, the way we handled ARPA, in my opinion, was ridiculous. And it has set this precedent of mindset that we'll just print some money and shell it out all over the country. And
You're talking about ARPA at the federal level?
oh, absolutely.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but we can't run from the fact that we
Well, no.
can't, we don't operate in a bubble here.
No, absolutely.
So.
Because I think High Point we did pretty okay.
Yeah, well, I think we did too. But it still is a fundamental shift in the philosophy of how things works.
Yeah.
And that's what we're dealing with.
What other areas would council like for us to evaluate or questions?
I'll get some more information about the cost you're getting for the commercial shared use kitchen. And you mentioned that,
Well, we probably will not, the preliminary costs are probably coming in for, but we still need to work through design on that. We don't even have a solid design on that. We're doing kind of some initial cost estimates. That's why I'm not gonna have that number before we get to the end of this fiscal year.
Yeah.
It's just
how did you
looking,
get this number here then, at $350,000, if you don't know
the,
the top line?
for the capital needs there?
No, the 350,000.
350,000.
General capital.
Oh, it's general capital.
Yeah, so I'll speak a little bit to part of that decision-making was, as they were going through architecture design, there was kind of, what's in there isn't enough for things like FF&E. Like, they knew that construction was going to be pushed to potentially the max, maybe more. And so we're like, okay, well, let's strategize where else is there funding. There's the unspent or unallocated ARPA, but we feel that since money had already been allocated to a shared use kitchen, it wouldn't make sense to come back more just for that project. And so it was kind of to build that up so when project moves forward, building is built, and we're ready for FF&E, the funds are there, so there's no delay in moving with that.
And if I may, I'll also add, we did pursue Golden Leaf Grant last year. We were not selected for that, but we were encouraged to reapply in their general grant process. We're also we looked at what's called the Southeastern Crescent Grant, which is an economic development grant through I believe the Department of Commerce. We also were not successful in that, but we've known for a while that the $4 million may not be enough to get us over the finish line. We've been pursuing other governmental, nonprofit granting opportunities, and will continue to do so.
So I have a question. Does that pose any kind of opportunity for a private-public partnership that maybe a private partner could get involved and help offset those expenses?
We've always talked about whether or not we would have an operator come in and take over the operation of the facility. But what is the right point to kind of step into that, and whether or not that operator would be willing to come to the table to actually help with the construction is an unknown. I thought we've got to get through the initial design phase of this first. But there's also going to be a similar conversation that we have when it gets to our 300 Oak facility. As that was purchased, we know we have kind of two anchor tenants that we would like to be in there. With the first being our Business High Point as a partner with the expansion of the generator. There was some state funding that came into that. But we realized even with the ARPA money and some of the public dollars that we have going into that, over a period of time, we're gonna have to identify more funds to really be able to make that project work. And we're still acquiring property around that area. These are very much, long-term investment projects, similar as we did with the stadium. We called it Catalyst 2.0 for a reason. We realized there's gonna be some phasing, we realized there's gonna be some grants, we realized there's gonna have to be some partnerships in this, and we're still walking through and figuring those things out. But it's also prudent for us to, set aside some funds as we can in our capital budget so that we can keep these projects moving. The Greenway's going through there. People are gonna be expecting to see some type of development happen. And there are some deadlines attached to the federal funding and the federal allocations that we have going into those projects where we have to be able to start moving on those. So they are estimates that we have that are included in this budget to be able to keep the progress moving on those projects over multiple years.
Thank you. I'm sorry, please.
Okay, let me just add something real quick. So, because I think, and I know that I didn't understand for years, and I know that Cyril just even admitted with Victor, that until you and I were at Krog Street Market District and really saw what the Atlanta Beltline had done in a very underserved, very blighted area, and it now became their oceanfront property. So that is the hope that this urban greenway going through that area is going to do, and that's why, everything that we can do as a city to make sure that that investment is successful is super important. And so I'm a huge advocate for the 300 Oak, obviously, because I see what can happen, and I believe that that's what's going to happen at a much smaller scale, but that is what's going to happen in High Point, and I can't wait to see it happen.
Councilman Moore.
One thing to maybe look at is, there's a proposal on our water sewer fund. Can you speak to the philosophy and what we're doing with that and why that's necessary, and if there's any room in that number?
While Stephen is collecting that information, what I want to do right now is kind of sum what we're doing today and what our next steps are. Obviously, typically at this budget session, we have normally come to a consensus on the finalization of a budget. Obviously, we're not there tonight, so we're going to need the third budget session. So really be very clear about what we want staff to look into. Make sure that we get that to them tonight so that they can have it ready for that next session. Because as Mayor Jefferson said, even though we do have some cushion, that's not the cushion that we want to take when it comes to finishing up the budget. And so just want to make sure that we give staff clear direction on what to bring back to us so that hopefully at this final budget session on the 29th, we can get to a consensus or be ready to tell them to finalize the budget for this year.
Well, and what would be helpful for staff is, if, we gave, a couple options of, kind of, 1 cent reduction or, kind of 2, some of the ones about the capital, the changes in capital. That would be one where if, there was a will of council for us to look at the reduction in capital, we could do that. That would have some impact on the recommendation that's coming in terms of the tax rate. We could look at how our fund balance numbers are coming in, and some of those items come back to you all. If we're starting to see that our revenues are coming in and that, we've been able to add fund balance back into our budget next year, we could add those. I just, want council to understand if we do that for next year, we're going to be starting at a point where we're either going to go into that budget with a reduced number for capital, or we're going to have to start building that number in for next year's budget. But that can be done as well. So it would be helpful for us to know if we need to come back to this next budget work session and we're really talking about 3 cents, we're already looking at 2.5,
Right.
and what does that mean for us versus we keep talking about different things, and it's
Madam
not
Manager,
really
how would you like to receive that information? Because
it would be helpful if we could get it now with the group here,
Right.
because it's hard, because the reality of it is we need a consensus from the
Yeah.
group that this is what the entire group wants to do. It's hard when I have, one member emailing and say, well, I want to see it here, and I want to see it here. Then I have staff trying to run 9 different scenarios, and that does not work well. It needs to be a consensus from the group that, I realize nobody's comfortable with this. Staff wasn't comfortable recommending this. Please understand that. But, we need to know a consensus from the group of, do you want us to look at make an adjustment to capital, and we just, take some of those things out, to help reduce the rate, and with the understanding that we'll bring some things back as fund balance comes in, or not.
I know, I would like to see it prioritized in the staff's priority order, so that if I were to draw a line, if I were to say we wanted to get to 2.5, where I could draw the line at that, whatever it is, 750,000, or at the 1 point, whatever the line is, to see those percent increases, that would be helpful to me, so that I know exactly what we're talking about. So I feel like it's been mischaracterized a couple times. I've said nobody's expressed any interest in cutting salaries, and then, I just heard about all these salary things. I don't think that's on the chopping block. So I think what we're talking about is these general capital outlays that we just want to see what you would.
I'd like to see a combination of maybe what Councilmember Harmon suggested, and I won't be able to repeat it, but anyway. A combination of that, a combination of maybe reducing some of the capital, maybe a combination of what, but definitely nothing with the salaries, because I totally agree that we need to pay people, we need to be competitive in the marketplace with the labor force. So I'm personally not interested in seeing any cuts there.
Councilwoman Peters, if I could sum up what you're saying, you would like to see a combination of fund balance allocation, a smaller rate increase, and some capital reduction. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Anybody have heartburn about asking staff to put together a few scenarios?
I'm curious about the increase in the marketing budget too. That was a big number, right?
Oh, yeah.
50,000.
The increase in the marketing budget.
That's almost entirely attributable to the communication specialists for
That was already approved.
Okay.
That was in the spreadsheet that we sent out.
But maybe that could be, because that is quite a hunky bit of change there.
We've already approved that. We already got the contract for that.
Okay.
So the one thing that we're locked into is anything that we've contractually obligated to and that we've already signed and issued and signed contracts.
And I think that's why it's really helpful, that spreadsheet that we went through, there's some obligations that we've already done on that sheet. A lot of you all know this, when you all get the budget and you all see that capital number that's in there, I've already gone through and cut what department, a big chunk of what departments have asked for.
Sure.
And even positions, I do believe this year.
And on the operating side too.
On the operating side, that's why.
Everything that was requested would be another 1.75 cents.
And that's why I started our conversation with that message on page 3, if you look at the capital, all the things that were requested, you will see reductions in those lines. The only one that you see is that 6.9% increase of the staffing side. But we'll go back and look, at capital. If the philosophy of the council is shifting some, where you all want to use fund balance, pointing out.
So I don't think we're committing to that. I think
if we can see it,
if we can see a few scenarios under the 3%, under the 3 cent rate, maybe, starting at maybe 2.5 cents with fund balance and capital reductions. I think if we can see going down the scale a few notches to zero increase, I think that would be helpful for us to make a decision at this next meeting.
And then one more question. Is there any chance that us getting awarded the FEMA BRIC grant will reduce any of the cost estimates in the, all right. Okay, I just wanted to put that out there, okay.
It'd be great.
Right.
And in reality of some of these grants is when you get in there and you find that there's some other things that you need to supplement.
Exactly. Yeah, I know.
You find some unknowns when you start opening the ground.
Matches and all.
So folks, any final comments? Any final comments or statements that you would like to make? I think staff, were we clear on the direction that we have coming into the next budget meeting?
The capital list prioritized, and then also scenarios in increments, a combination of reduction in capital and adding fund balance to reduce revenues.
Fantastic. Mayor Jefferson, I think he's, I thought you were frozen there for a second. You were sitting so still. I thought you were frozen. Any final comments?
I'm just doing my best to pay attention, Mayor Pro Tem.
Okay.
No, I was just gonna say a quick note of thanks to everyone, not only to our staff who worked really hard to try to process, a lot of questions, work on information to get out.
Yeah.
Thank you to the public who's been showing up, voicing their questions, voicing their concerns. And also thank you to this governing body. It is not easy, passing a budget. It's never easy. I know our first one, we had that $7 million shortfall due to COVID.
Yeah.
And we spent several weeks just trying to figure out how to make that happen. But it is the job of governments, and we've got a tall duty of bringing the concerns and wishes of our constituents to the table. So that way, hopefully, we can do the very best in terms of representing their interests. So thank you all so much, and look forward to reconnecting in a few days' time.
Absolutely.
Sounds good.
I don't have anything else at this point, going once, going twice.
What's our next step? What's in my calendar?
29th?
29th, our next budget session is 29th.
What time?
At 4 o'clock. All right, if there are no further comments, I will entertain a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
That's a motion by Councilman Moore, second by Councilwoman Peters. Any discussion on the motion? If not, hearing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.